picture this. There's a man sitting alone on a park bench. He's not scrolling, not posing, not watching anyone. He's simply there, still, at peace. While around him, the world races. People rush to meetings, chase promotions, swipe for love, record their 37th TikTok of the day. They laugh too loudly, speak too fast, always performing, always reaching for something they don't yet have. But not him. He's not chasing wealth. He's not looking for love. He's not trying to be seen. And yet, somehow, he stands out more than anyone. He radiates something rare, something unsettling, a kind of quiet fullness, a presence that says, I don't need anything from you. And that, my friend, makes him the most dangerous person in that space, not because he wants to take power, but because he doesn't need it. Not because he's better than anyone, but because he's no longer bound by the same invisible chains. While others seek approval, comfort, distraction, he has found something far more powerful, inner completeness. And that changes everything. Because in a society built on want, the man who needs nothing becomes a mirror. And in that mirror, the world sees its own addiction to attention, to validation, to more. So here's the question I want you to hold on to as we go deeper. Why does a man who is inwardly full threaten a system that profits from your emptiness? Let's get brutally honest. This society doesn't just encourage you to want more, it requires you to. The modern world isn't designed to fulfill you, it's designed to keep you needing. The moment you stop craving, you stop consuming. And if you stop consuming, the entire machine begins to rust. That's why every screen whispers, you're not enough. That's why every advertisement screams, you're falling behind. You're not successful enough, so buy the course. You're not attractive enough, so buy the cream, the clothes, the surgery. You're not connected enough, so spend 6 hours a day checking who liked your post, who messaged back, who left you on read. But here's the dark truth. It's not just marketing, it's mind control. Carl Jung once said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. Why? Because once you look inward, truly inward, you realize how much of your identity was built on borrowed beliefs, external expectations, and artificial desires. Society doesn't want you to meet your soul. It wants you to keep running from it. Because the moment you confront your inner world, you begin to see just how manipulated your outer world is. And Jung wasn't the only one who knew this. Centuries earlier, Machiavelli understood the same principle, but from the other side of the chessboard. As the advisor to princes and rulers, he knew exactly how to control a population. His advice? Never let the people feel whole. Keep them distracted. Keep them needing. Keep them looking up to the crown for salvation. Because a citizen who is content, who doesn't fear lack, who doesn't hunger for praise, is also a citizen who cannot be ruled. Think about that. When you need nothing, no one can dangle bait in front of you. No promise can seduce you. No threat can scare you. You become ungovernable. And to systems built on dependency, that's the ultimate rebellion. So next time you feel that manufactured itch to be more, to have more, to prove more, pause. Ask yourself, is this a genuine desire or a dependency I've been conditioned to crave? Because the man who questions his own need is already halfway to freedom, and the man who no longer needs, he's already there. So what happens when a man begins to unlearn what society has programmed into him? What happens when he stops measuring his worth by how much he has, how many people approve of him, or how well he plays the game? Carl Jung had a word for this kind of transformation: individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, not who the world told you to be. It's not about adding more, it's about stripping away everything false. At the center of this journey is the confrontation with two forces, the persona and the shadow. The persona is the mask you wear to survive in society. It's the polished image, the likable version of you that plays along to avoid rejection. It's the part of you that performs. Jung said, "The persona is a kind of coat that we wear in dealing with the world. But it's not who you are. It's who you pretend to be." Most people confuse the mask for their identity, and in doing so, they become prisoners of it. But the man who walks the path of individuation tears the mask off. He turns inward, and there he finds the shadow, everything he was told not to be. His anger, his lust, his fear, his ambition, his wounds. Most people run from this part of themselves. Jung warned, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. But the dangerous man, the man who needs nothing, he doesn't run, he integrates. He brings the shadow into the light. He doesn't let it control him, but he no longer denies it. And by doing so, he becomes whole. This man no longer craves approval. He's not terrified of rejection. He's not driven by the unconscious need to belong. He's done the inner work, the quiet, brutal work of facing himself. He's not trying to be good by someone else's definition. He's trying to be real, and that is what makes him dangerous, because he's not waiting for society to validate his truth. He knows it for himself. He's not reactive. He's rooted. He doesn't follow trends. He follows truth. And in a world built on imitation, someone who is authentically whole becomes a mirror others don't want to look into, because he reminds them of what they've avoided, themselves. Now step into the world of power, politics, control. Machiavelli saw the world not as it should be, but as it is. In The Prince, he wrote, "Men are motivated by two things, fear and hope. That's how rulers keep people in line. If you fear punishment, you obey. If you hope for reward, you comply." It's a simple formula. Give them enough fear to stay cautious, enough hope to stay loyal. Keep them needing, keep them expecting, and you will never run out of tools to control them. But what happens when a man no longer fears? What happens when he stops hoping for something outside himself? That man is Machiavelli's nightmare, because he's not seduced by promises and he's not scared by threats. You can't buy him with status. You can't silence him with exile. He doesn't need anything from you, so what leverage do you have left? He's not dangerous because he wants to overthrow the system. He's dangerous because he's immune to it. Because every system, political, corporate, cultural, is built on the assumption that people can be manipulated through their desires and their fears. The man who needs nothing breaks that equation. He's not a radical shouting in the streets. He's something far more unsettling, someone who simply walks away. And that terrifies those in power because it exposes the truth. They never controlled him to begin with. They only controlled his hunger. Once he's full from within, he no longer plays the game. And when enough people stop playing, the game ends. That's why society paints this man as dangerous. Not because he's violent, but because he's free. He is self-contained. He is ungovernable. Not through rebellion, but through clarity. And that's what makes him the greatest threat to any system built on dependence. He doesn't need the system. And that's exactly why the system needs him to stay asleep. So what exactly goes on inside the mind of a man who needs nothing? It's easy to assume he's cold, detached, emotionless. But that's not it. He's not numb. He's just not ruled. And that distinction makes all the difference. At the core, this man has developed a kind of psychological independence that most people never taste. He's no longer addicted to external input, and that starts with one simple, terrifying strength. He's not afraid of being alone. Most people run from solitude like it's a disease. They keep the music playing, the conversations flowing, the screens glowing, anything to avoid sitting with their own thoughts. But the self-sufficient man has made peace with silence. He doesn't need constant stimulation because he's not at war with himself. He's not trying to escape anything. In fact, he listens to himself. That's the first sign of strength. Second, he doesn't seek consensus. He's not looking around the room to check if his opinion is popular. He doesn't need a mob to feel confident because his meaning, his direction, comes from within. He's anchored. That doesn't mean he's arrogant or dismissive. It means he thinks for himself. And when you think for yourself, you're willing to stand alone. That kind of independence makes people uncomfortable, because most live in echo chambers, but he lives in truth, even if it isolates him. And third, the self-sufficient man is immune to bribery, not because he's above temptation, but because he's not led by need. When you no longer fear lack, you become incorruptible. You can't be bought with status. You can't be coerced with approval. You can't be baited with belonging. The world offers him its shiny distractions: money, fame, acceptance, and he's unmoved because he doesn't need them to feel whole. And that's what makes him so dangerous. Not dangerous in the violent sense, but in the unshakable one. You can't scare him. You can't flatter him. You can't manipulate him, because you hold nothing he's desperate for. He is a man who cannot be bought, cannot be broken, and cannot be baited. And that kind of man terrifies a world built on control. Carl Jung didn't believe in shortcuts. He believed in depth. Real transformation, he argued, doesn't happen by reading a quote or downloading a morning routine. It happens through the long, often brutal journey inward, a process of reclaiming the soul piece by piece. And for Jung, this journey had clear stages. It begins with confronting the persona, the mask we wear to survive, then wrestling with the shadow, the parts we've buried or disowned. But it doesn't end there. After facing the darkness, we must encounter the anima or animus, the internal counterpart to our external identity. For men, it's the feminine within, the sensitivity, intuition, vulnerability they've been taught to reject. For women, it's the assertiveness and logic they've been told to suppress. Jung believed these inner opposites were essential. Why? Because without them, we're incomplete. When we integrate them, we become whole. And finally, we meet the self, not the ego, not the mask, but the totality of who we are, the conscious and unconscious united, the light and shadow in harmony. This is not just self-awareness, it's self-possession. And once a man reaches this state, everything changes. He's no longer reactive to the world because he's not defined by it. He's seen himself fully and accepted what he found. So he's not afraid of being judged. He doesn't crave applause. He doesn't shrink under criticism because he knows who he is. That's why the world can't move him, because when you've mapped your inner terrain, the external world loses its grip. You don't need to be accepted. You already are by yourself. And once that happens, no amount of shame, praise, pressure, or rejection can steer you off your path. You're no longer operating out of lack. You're operating out of wholeness, and that is the real threat. A man who walks through the world with nothing to prove. A man who doesn't seek approval but alignment. A man who doesn't conform to be accepted, but integrates to be real. He doesn't need a mask. He's become himself. Machiavelli feared many types of people, traitors, fools, and rivals. But there was one kind of man he couldn't quite place, couldn't predict, and therefore couldn't control. The man who doesn't care about power, not because he's weak or passive, but because he's seen through the game. Because once a man stops craving power, he also becomes immune to it, and that is what terrifies rulers the most. In The Prince, Machiavelli detailed how power is won, expanded, and protected. He believed people would do anything for it, betray, flatter, lie, even sacrifice their values, and most do. But what happens when someone steps outside the race entirely? When a man doesn't scheme for status, doesn't fight for attention, and doesn't measure himself by how high he climbs. Here's the paradox. That man becomes more powerful than the ones who obsess over power. Why? Because people respect what they can't corrupt. They admire what they can't explain. And they're drawn to what they sense is free. The man who turns down the throne often earns more reverence than the one who sits on it. Not because he seeks followers, but because others instinctively trust those who walk their own path. That's what makes him a silent threat. He doesn't overthrow the system. He doesn't shout, protest, or demand reform. He simply refuses to play, and that refusal speaks louder than 1,000 slogans. It shows others that there's another way to live, one not built on climbing or competing, but on grounding and becoming. His presence alone disrupts the narrative. His refusal to crave what others chase exposes the poverty behind the pursuit. Machiavelli would have called this man dangerous not because he's a rebel, but because he's a reminder, a living contradiction to everything the system says is necessary. A man like that doesn't need a crown to wield influence. He holds no official title, yet becomes a model of quiet defiance. And worst of all, he plants seeds in the minds of others. What if I don't need it either? That one question, once whispered, can unravel an empire built on want. Let's call this what it is. Needlessness is resistance. Not loud, not flashy, not even confrontational, but real, subversive, revolutionary. We live in a world engineered to keep you wanting, because when you want, you obey. When you're hungry, you'll do anything to eat. So the system's job isn't to satisfy you, it's to keep you just unsatisfied enough to keep consuming. In economics, they fuel that need by convincing you that you're never enough. So you keep buying things to prove you are. New car, new skin, new status symbol. The market doesn't just sell products, it sells identity. And when you stop buying into it, you break the loop. In politics, they thrive on your sense of dependency. You need us to fix it. You need us to protect you. You need us to save you from the chaos we secretly benefit from. The leader becomes the parent, you, the frightened child. But the man who needs nothing doesn't wait to be rescued. He doesn't outsource his strength. He doesn't play the victim. And psychologically, the manipulation is even deeper. Your worth becomes tied to attention, to likes, to being seen, to being liked. We're trained to believe that validation equals value. So we hustle for significance instead of building self-respect. But here's the truth, no one profits from you knowing. You don't need any of it to be whole. The man who realizes that becomes a glitch in the system. He's not useful to algorithms. He's not profitable to markets. He's not loyal to political promises. He doesn't panic, doesn't beg, doesn't posture. He simply is. Calm, centered, self-led. And that presence alone cracks the illusion. Because when you no longer play the role of the one who lacks, you refuse to play the game at all. And that's not just spiritual defiance, it's strategic rebellion. The world doesn't know what to do with someone it can't motivate through fear or lure through fantasy. That's the man the system quietly hopes you never become. True self-sufficiency isn't just about living off the grid or cutting ties with the world. It's deeper than that. It's not about isolation. It's about integration. A man who needs nothing has mastered 4 distinct dimensions of the inner life. And when these align, he becomes immovable. Psychologically, he's full from within. He doesn't wait for praise to feel proud. He doesn't collapse under criticism. His sense of self isn't fragile because it's not dependent. He's made peace with his past, owns his flaws, and doesn't outsource his self-worth. This doesn't make him arrogant, it makes him whole. Morally, he lives by a code he chose, not one inherited blindly from parents, media, or the culture he grew up in. He's examined it, tested it, suffered for it, and now he doesn't need public approval to stay true to it. His integrity doesn't wobble when the crowd turns. He does what's right, not what's popular. He may walk alone, but he never walks against his own values. Intellectually, he thinks dangerous thoughts. He questions what others accept. He's willing to challenge sacred truths, tear down inherited dogmas, and build belief systems from the ground up. He doesn't confuse comfort with truth. He'd rather be disturbed by what's real than comforted by what's false. That's why he can't be programmed, because he's already deconstructed the software. And in terms of will, he doesn't fold under pressure. The world can push, mock, seduce, and threaten. but he stays rooted. He doesn't chase applause. He doesn't fear exile. He makes his choices deliberately, even if they cost him everything. His power isn't in domination, but in non-submission. That's why he can't be used. He has no leash, no handle to grab. He's already decided, I would rather lose the world than lose myself. Let's be honest, this path isn't glamorous, it's not easy, and it's definitely not for everyone. Becoming the man who needs nothing comes with a price. You will be misunderstood. People will label you cold, distant, or arrogant because they can't fathom someone who doesn't crave what they crave. They'll question your motives. They'll mistake your silence for emptiness, your restraint for weakness, your refusal to conform for rebellion. But they're wrong. You're not rebelling, you're remembering. You'll lose relationships, not because you don't care, but because you stop performing. And when you stop performing, you stop giving people the version of you they were comfortable with. That kind of authenticity breaks illusions, and some people won't forgive you for waking up. You'll notice how shallow many connections really were, how many were built on mutual need, not mutual truth, and that realization can feel like loneliness, but it's actually clarity. You'll also lose the old version of yourself, the one who chased approval, the one who feared rejection, the one who twisted and reshaped himself to fit in, and that loss might sting. But it's necessary, because what you gain in return is something no one can give you, and no one can take away. Freedom. Not freedom as an aesthetic, not the illusion of choice wrapped in consumerism or ideology, but actual internal sovereign freedom. The kind of freedom where your thoughts are yours, your emotions are grounded, your beliefs are chosen, your presence is anchored. You're not caught in reactive loops. You're not running from yourself. You're not negotiating your soul for comfort. You've returned to center, and from that center, life becomes clearer, deeper, more meaningful, because when you need nothing, you can finally see everything for what it is. You don't love to get love. You love because it's real. You don't speak to impress. You speak to express. You don't follow to belong. You walk your path because it's yours. That's not detachment. That's devotion to truth, to integrity, to inner peace. So here's the challenge, the real challenge. Become the one who needs nothing, not because it makes you superior, not because it puts you above others, but because it sets you free. Free from being manipulated, free from being sold to, free from betraying yourself, just to be accepted. Stop begging for approval, the likes, the compliments, the nods from people who barely know themselves. Let it go. Start questioning the story you've been given. The story that says your worth is tied to how much you earn, how liked you are, how much noise you make. Start asking, who benefits from this belief? Who profits from my need to prove myself? You'll be surprised by the answer. Then turn inward, not to escape the world, but to reclaim your place in it. Get still, listen, confront your shadow, peel back the persona, integrate the parts of yourself you've denied, and don't do it so you can seem enlightened. Do it so you can stop being used. Because when you no longer need anything, you're no longer reactive, you're no longer desperate, and most importantly, you're no longer controllable. In a world built on desire and fear, the man who needs nothing becomes untouchable. This world doesn't need more obedient men. It needs more whole men. Men who can't be bribed, bullied, or broken. Men who carry peace, not because they avoid the fight, but because they've already won the one that matters most, the fight within. So if you're listening to this and something deep inside you stirred, good. That's your signal. The work begins now. Stay silent, stay solid, stay dangerous.